Welcome back, everyone, to Capital Conversations. I'm your host, AJ Smith, and today we have a remarkable guest. He's doing some really cool stuff in my old stomping grounds in Washington State. I used to live in Washington State for about 6 years, and he is doing some really neat stuff with value-add multifamily in a space where a lot of investors are staying away from. So I'm going to be talking to him about it. I'm going to be seeing what he likes about Washington State doing value-add multifamily in that space. This is Alex Burch. He is the co-founder of Veritas Equity Partners. He's also a leading voice in the multifamily investing space. He's transitioned from a successful tech career at AWS into real estate, and he scaled from his first 8-unit property into a $50 million portfolio in Washington State. He specializes in those value-add apartment communities, often older buildings from 1960s to the 1990s, where the strategic cosmetic renovations drive significant value without heavy construction. He has over a decade of multifamily experience in the Pacific Northwest, track record of delivering strong returns, which I'll be asking about today. And what makes him an important voice is just he has a really unique approach to business. As I mentioned earlier, he's doing some business in some states where a lot of investors are staying away from, and he's identified some areas where he can fill a niche and fill a need and do it really well. He also only raises capital for deals that he is personally leading, which is something I think is really cool, and that ensures full alignment and focus on executing his project. So without further ado, I will introduce this data-driven and tech-savvy investor, Alex Burch. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, AJ. It was a great intro.
Absolutely. Welcome. So let me ask, right? You started in tech sales, AWS, before going full-time into real estate. What motivated that transition? How did your tech background influence the way that you approach multifamily investing?
Yeah, so it was, looking back, it was a really fun ride. I didn't really expect to get where we are now, but it's been really cool. So I started in, not at AWS, but even before that, just at tech startups. I was in the Seattle area, so tons of technology business here. Everybody thinks Microsoft, Amazon, the big companies that are based here, but there's thousands of supporting SaaS businesses in the region as well. So I probably worked for 5 or 6 different startups that were usually based in the Bay Area. They wanted to come to Seattle, figure out how to build their model here. So I turned into kind of that startup guy, and I was buying apartment buildings on the side the whole time. So I got into my first deal in 2010, and I was selling. It was just sort of a side hustle thing that I knew was a smart path to create some generational wealth for my family, to take care of my retirement. It was just kind of that. And I just stumbled around, self-managed, picked off deals here and there for, from 2010 to 2020. And then I would say that I really figured out the apartment business model, after about 10 years. So, call it 5-6 years ago, we really figured it out, started 1031ing aggressively, poured some gas on it. And about a year ago, dropped out of AWS. Was my last tech role. I was just running a region for the sales org out there, into doing Veritas Equity Partners full time. But yeah,
Right.
it was two worlds for 15 years.
Yeah, and you can really dive into that mindset of that tech investor, of the tech worker. Can you just share with me from your own perspective, what drew you toward real estate? Why? Because a lot of folks that work in tech make a pretty good salary. So what drew you toward real estate? Are there some advantages maybe you knew about when you first started? And are there some others that you've learned about since then?
Yeah, and that was me included. Nobody in my family came from that world. My parents worked their tails off, but it certainly didn't grow up in a resource heavy household. And so I was doing a lot better than I ever expected personally off the W-2 alone. When I was like 25, 26, I kind of hit what I thought was like more money than I would be making anyway, in general. So it's a wonderful place to go make money. It's very volatile in terms of what I was doing too. 25% of my money was guaranteed. It's always kind of in a performance type environment. So that wasn't a new thing for me to drop it entirely, but that world is obviously you have less control. You can do kind of quick hits in terms of cash. It's kind of tough to do that with apartment buildings, right? Like that's not really the business model. But what attracted me to real estate in general was just some really great mentors. When I was young, I just was asking a bunch of questions about money and what they did to make all of their money. And I just kind of triangulated at a young age, like probably when I was like 18, that the people with serious cash and serious net worth all had their paws in these apartment buildings, and so that was kind of the genesis of what got me curious about it. And I also didn't mind the slow money approach to like, hey, we're going to get in this thing. It's not going to be terribly sexy in the beginning, but we're going to figure it out, build some equity, get some cash flow coming in, like all of that. But it was really a long tail kind of vision. And, now we're here 15 years in and able to really scale because of that. So I'm happy I did it. But yeah, two totally separate paths to money for sure.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned slow money. The idea of slow money, fast money, like midterm money, I think has really come up recently. When you were first starting and you just jumped into real estate, how did you approach like slow money, fast money, medium term money?
Yeah.
Or did you just focus on like buying apartments?
Yeah. I thought that I understood it, right? Like looking back on it, when I'm 22 years old, I was like, I didn't really know much at all. I'd been reading books and, talking to people as best as I could, but now we know about, I don't know, 10x more than we did at that point. So it's such a different business now. But I think for me in the beginning, it really truly was like, hey, I'm not going to see anything from this for decades. Like that's where my head was. And I was like, I'm not going to pull any money out of this. I'm not going to pay myself anything. We're just going to keep reinvesting, whether it's cash flow or refinance money or a 1031 or whatever, and just build a portfolio that way. And then at some point in the future, I'll be glad I did it. Like that was where my head was. So I was not cash flow driven at all. I wasn't trying to replace my income. That's not where my head was. I was purely after equity gain, net worth growth. Like that was my entire lens. I didn't take a dollar for 13 years personally off of any of the deals that we did. And, that was up to like a $30 million stack with plenty of cash flow and plenty of opportunities with refinances and all these things where there'd be millions of dollars sitting there that I could have, winning, bought some dumb stuff. But we just kept rolling it in and buying more buildings. So but to me, what slow money meant was like, hey, we're not going to see it. We're not going to gain from it. We're not going to buy anything dumb. We're just going to live off of W-2 and then eventually transition. And we did that.
Nice. Yeah. And you mentioned a $30 million kind of stack, right? Take us back to that first deal where you bought that 8-unit Seattle around 2010. How'd you get the deal done? What were some of those key lessons from that first one?
Yeah. So that was 2010. And my memory was everybody was like, real estate might be tanked. Who knows if it's coming back? Kind of like this doom and gloom thing. I was so young. I didn't have any money that I lost, like in that whole recession. So it wasn't like I was coming in with all these battle scars. I just was coming out into the workforce as hey, I got to figure out how to make money. And it feels like this is probably going to come back. And again, with that lens of like, we're going to hold this thing for 10 years, 15 years, whatever, like I wasn't terribly concerned with like what's going to happen in the next 6 to 12 to 18 to even 24, 36 months, like that's not where my head was. And if you can go back and look at, past recessions and cycles and everything's a cycle, right? So like it made sense to me, like this will come back at some point, like I didn't know that was like a perfect time to be buying stuff, like but it's funny because, now I talk to people and they're like, man, what great timing, like you're so lucky you got in. But I was like, like back then in the moment, I had a lot of people telling me that it was not a good idea, that no, it was probably never recovering, that the market was tanked forever, like all of this stuff. And so in the moment, it certainly didn't feel like a no-brainer. I think everybody would have gone in, right? But no, so that first deal, I had just been learning and researching and again, reading books, talking to anybody I could possibly talk to. I had worked my way through college, so I had accumulated some money, put some money together with some other people, and we bought that first one. And it was just a little 8-unit, like 1970s vintage in the city of Seattle, which the landlord laws were a little more friendly at that point. And so we don't buy in the city of Seattle anymore, but that was the first deal. And so we got it for $1 million. And now that building we sold it, after 8 years or something, but that building would probably be worth $3.5 million now, like something like that, maybe a touch more. But, I operated it, I self-managed it. I had my day job. I was getting the calls at 2 a.m. from tenants. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. We were not using any systems, like it was literally like a Google sheet that I was doing my best. Right. And like my background is not accounting, like it was none of that. So it was pretty clunky, but a year and a half in or 2 years in, the market got a little better. We had increased the rents a little bit. And an older mentor of mine was like, hey, you might be able to refinance that thing. And I was like, what? Like that wasn't even like, again, I didn't even have this like business plan in my head. I just was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. But sure enough, went to a bank and they, I could get all the money. So 250 grand that we used to acquire it, got all that back, plus another 300,000 bucks, kept the building, still cash flowed, took that 550, went and bought a 5-unit, about 30 minutes south, went and bought another 8-unit, literally did it again, went and bought a 16 unit. Like, I mean, it was just this for 10 years. And I self-managed literally by myself for, yeah, like 8 years. And we got to 60, 70 units or something. It was brutal. I was not doing a good job. Like you just hit this place where it's like, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing. Decided to 1031. Washington State is kind of broken into two sides, right? Like there's like the west side, which is like Seattle and like all the major markets that everybody knows of. And then there's Eastern Washington, which is a little more agriculture. There's tourism out there. Like I love Eastern Washington, but it's a totally different vibe. But I had been kind of getting some weird letters from the city of Seattle about, hey, do you want to participate in our rental housing assistance program? Like those types of things. And it started to feel less like an option and more like, hey, this stuff's coming, like whether you like it or not. So we 1031 everything out of Western Washington that we had and bought in Eastern Washington around 2019-ish, 2020. And so we kind of, doubled our unit count, rolled all the money back in, cash flow probably tripled, and then started operating out there, but with third-party property managers. And that was when a light bulb kind of clicked for me. It was like, oh, wow, like I could do so much more if we figure out this, third-party property management model. And I actually was understanding how to do this more and like, could underwrite deals better and all of that stuff. And then we just kept scaling and buying in Eastern Washington for the next couple of years. During COVID, we were buying, like I loved it. All of that chaos was good. We were acquiring through it. And then about 2 years ago, put together Veritas Equity Partners to raise investor capital and just do more of the same. But I hadn't syndicated any deals until last year. So yeah.
Right. And it sounds like most, if not all, of your acquisitions are in Washington State. Is that correct?
We only buy in Washington. Yeah, in specific pockets of Washington to be super specific.
So with that, the question comes, there's a lot of people, as I alluded to earlier, there's a lot of people that just stay away from Washington in general. So how do you think of like kind of the landlord laws and the navigating the landscape between like, red state, blue state, that kind of thing? Like, how do you navigate that, and what draws you to just staying in Washington versus diversifying geographically?
Yeah, so I have so many little like anecdotal stories of, what we've learned and people we've met and people that have been down the road, tens of thousands of units later, right? And we're not that big by any means, but I'm always trying to learn, and see around corners with the help of people that have been around the corners, right? And so one thing that I absolutely freaked me out in the very beginning of like, call it 2020, 2021, because I had quite a lot of money that we could have placed into deals in other parts of the country. And I had experimented and bought some single family houses in Dallas and rented as rentals just to kind of test the market. And that was probably back in 2016 or 2017. And like those deals did fine. I just didn't like being so far away from them. So like that's why I got out of them. It wasn't like a market decision or anything. I just recognized, hey, I know this place here. I'm going to stay here. But in terms of like, COVID and everybody shuffling around the country and all of these big population changes and movements, the number one thing that just didn't quite connect for me was like, hey, in these places where everybody's going, there's essentially like infinite urban sprawl possible. Like there's tons of land, there's tons of space to build. And we don't have that here. Like there's nowhere to build. It's particularly in Western Washington, the Puget Sound region where Seattle is, where we like to buy, again, not in the city of Seattle, but 30 minutes north, 30 minutes south, the tertiary markets that surround it that are still close in, that still serve that market. There is literally no land. The only place to go is up. The zoning doesn't particularly support that. So it's not even possible in a lot of these places. So there's a massive supply problem. I mean, the Puget Sound region only delivered like 3,000 new units in 2024. It's crazy low, like crazy low. And there's way more people than that need housing. The houses here are also absurdly expensive. So there's so many people that are sort of boxed in and have to rent. So, when I'm looking at our rent rolls, when I'm looking at our vacancy analysis, all of this stuff, we are on stabilized assets. And these are like 70s vintage buildings, like nothing fancy. We are below 4% in terms of vacancy rates, like everywhere. And I mean, some buildings were running like 2.5%. And that's like all up economic vacancy, everything. So, and you look at other markets, and I talk to other operators all the time, and a group that has 3,000 units in Arizona tell me, hey, like world-class operators out here are running like 10% vacancy. Like that's just what it is. It's getting worse, and then you start looking at the Sun Belt and these other markets, and it's like the supply is crazy, like tens and like 50, 60,000 new apartment units, delivered in Dallas last year or something. And rents dropped 22%. Like, that's just a supply thing, right? So it's like we don't have much competition out here in terms of our units. So as long as we're staying in our lane and buying on our thesis, which we won't deviate from just because we know it, we love it, we're going to stay there. And I want to buy everything that fits our buy boxes. We just don't have any issues like that out here.
It's basic economics, right? Supply
Yes.
and demand. If you can't deliver more housing units, the price of the current units is going to go up because there's just a lot of people that need housing.
Yes.
So I think that's really insightful. One thing though that I do, I personally like am just still trying to wrap my brain around is like rent control. How do you approach rent control in Washington State and kind of navigating that?
Yeah. So unfortunately, rent control just seems to hurt people that don't have resources, like it just doesn't work. And so for us, Washington just passed it. And I'm one of the few, I guess, operators. I was okay with it. Like when they started floating it around the house and all of these things, we're watching it really close just to understand it. But you can look at where this has been passed in other parts of the country, and literally just economically, it makes sense. Like there's no magic thing that I'm going to say here, but developers are going to be far less interested in developing in places that have rent control. That's just clear. So there'll be even less supply. The people that we rent to are mid-market. We're not doing Section 8. We're not doing affordable. We'll have some of those tenants when we buy the buildings or whatever, but that's not our business model to need like government resources for our tenants. So in terms of like how I look at it and how pretty much every operator that fits in our space looks at it is we just got the playbook for what the rental increases are going to be annually. And it's 7% plus CPI, which floats in the mid twos, right? So like we're looking at 9-10% annual rent bumps. Like our business plan is only like a 6 to 8% rent bump for 2 years, and then we float 3 to 5 a year from there. Like we've always been underneath those thresholds. Like it's very rare that we're coming in and doing anything more than an 8% lift in the first year across the board anyway. That's super, super rare. So it doesn't hurt us. I think it's just going to help us. I think it's going to hurt people that need the help. It's going to hurt supply. And so I'm not too tripped up on it.
So granular question, when you guys are underwriting, do you underwrite like 8 to 10%? Do you underwrite 3%? How do you guys approach that with rent control now in place?
So we now underwrite 7% for the first 3 years, and then we'll do two different models. So we'll do 7% a year every year for 5 to 6 years. That's what everybody thinks is going to basically happen now. There's going to be that base level 7%, not factoring the CPI number. And that's just going to be anticipated rent increases annually. So we'll look at it that way. That's more than we need for our deals to work. So what we do is 7, and then either 3 or 5, depending on the market. So if we're in a certain county that like Snohomish County, which is like Everett, Linwood, like these markets that are 20 minutes from the city of Seattle, those might support a little more. If we're in Eastern Washington, we might drop it down to 3% instead of 5 or something after that. But we were pretty much always underwriting single digit rental increases in the first 2 years anyway. So nothing really changed for us.
And why the drop off from like 7 to 5 or 3? If the rent controls 7% or 9% or whatever, why do you think in years like 4 or 5 it would go down?
We've just always been ultra conservative in terms of how we underwrite. So I basically just do a cost of living increase once the building's stabilized. We're typically looking to transact on something around that year 3 or 4 mark anyway. So at that point, we're stabilized. We've probably done all the value add that we're going to need to do inside of the first 2 years. So like that stuff's done. Once we're maximized in terms of NOI, we're usually looking to transact anyway. It's just not, in my opinion, the best use of capital if it's sitting there as far as equity, right? Like the cash flow is just not going to support that being the best use of it. So it'd be rare that we would hold something that long unless we were sitting on like a rezoning perspective or something that could be redeveloped or, which we have a few assets like that we're going to park just and wait for zoning to change and probably sell to a developer. But for the most part, we're just trying to be conservative. So, if we did 7%, and which everybody is saying that's going to be the new norm, if we did 7% every year for 5 years, the deals would just look better.
Yeah. And it's crazy to think about your return on equity being crazy low after you've done all your renovation and all that stuff, right? Because you have a lot that's trapped in the property and you have to free that by selling and moving it into something else, which it sounds like you guys are pretty consistently 1031ing and moving it into other projects. Is that kind of the game plan?
Totally. And, that also starts all the way in the beginning from the debt strategy, right? So this is where we are buying now from a lot of distressed syndicators that bought in 2021, whatever, at 3.5%, 4% interest rates. The deals were way too thin. They didn't plan the CapEx properly. Their vacancy rates are too high. And we're coming in and basically saving them from having to do capital calls with their investor basis. And, they might be breaking even on something that they've held for 3 or 4 years. But we're really rigid in that too. So we only do super conservative loans, like agency loans. Freddie, Fannie, we're coming in with like 30% down on actuals. We're not doing any kind of pro forma loans. We're not doing any kind of bridge or mezz debt. We're doing none of those things. So we underwrite the deal to exit with a little prepay in there, based on what year we plan on doing it. I would way rather have that and then have the ability to hold it if something went sideways. But yeah, we're just conservative all around. So I'm not trying to get too crazy with anything.
Yeah. So if you guys are doing only agency debt, that means everything you're buying is pretty well occupied, right? Or what's the lowest occupancy that you'd go after?
So typically what we're doing is the buildings are great from an occupancy perspective, always 90% plus. It's very rare for them to be lower than that. That would have to be like a big operator error. Maybe they had an insurance claim or something like that. But at the end of the day, we're looking for stuff that fits about 15% lifts from like an operational perspective on the rents. So kind of a first pass is like, hey, this 2-bed, 1-bath in this particular neighborhood, should be getting $1,900 a month. The current operator is getting $1,650. Like, cool. Like, that's a first check. We'll go look at it. It could be because it's literally never been renovated in 40 years, like that. We do find those. Typically who we're buying from are like families that have had this thing for a couple decades. Maybe it's a group that's used to buying big Class A institutional stuff and just saw like, hey, there's no deal flow there and the deals are too thin. So we're going to go try these smaller ones. Because we're buying stuff between $4 and $10 million typically in terms of purchase price. So we're under the institution radar, we're under funds, like we're under family offices, like that's all by design. But sometimes we'll find them that they went out there and did that, but they don't know how to manage them. So the rents are probably too low. Like maybe they gave too many concessions. Like maybe they just realized like, hey, we don't know how to lease these things because we don't have on-site employees. So we're just going to park this thing and let it go on cruise control and not really monkey with it. So yeah, occupancy is usually pretty high. It has to be for what we're doing across the board. And management isn't necessarily bad. It's just they're just not effective.
Gotcha. And you guys specialize in value add multifamily, particularly older Class BC properties. So like 1960s to 1990s that you can improve. Why do you target this age range and that kind of profile for that property?
Yeah. So I would say we are by far and away mostly from like 1975 to 1995. Like that's going to be our type thing. We will buy 60s product if it's the buy boxes and it's in decent shape. Usually we'll know whoever owns it already. We're buying from a lot of the same people over and over again. So that also helps. I have just found there's institutional buyers, and you know this too. Like there's family offices, there's institutions, there's funds, there's REITs, right? Like there's mega families that have hundreds of millions of dollars that they want to just go buy Class A stuff. There's only so many of those deals. And so, in the very beginning, I met somebody early about a year and a half ago in this, because I went out and told my network, hey, I'm going to go raise money and do more of this. And it's been awesome. Like we haven't had a huge problem raising money. But I had an institutional partner that was like, hey, like we want to partner with you, but we only cut $15-20 million checks. So the deals have to be 30, 40, 50 million bucks. And I was just like, all right, I'll go see like if I could figure that out, And so I went pretty hard, like going out there in my network and looking at these deals, but they're just so skinny. The margins are so thin. The rents are usually already maxed. They're at market. There's really no value to be added. Like, because there's been seasoned operators that owned them. There's been people that have cranked them already. Like there's just no skin in the game left. And so I figured out in a matter of like a month, I was like, these are silly, like it's not scalable. We're going to basically have to uncover like 30 deals to find one that works. And at the end of the day, I just didn't want that. So these deals that we're buying, there's a bunch of them, particularly in hubs like the Seattle market, the Western Washington market. And I think this is common in all of what we would consider kind of blue zones, in the country. Like we talk about California, we talk about New York, like these different markets that are saturated, that have a ton of money, a lot of people. There's not a lot of land. Everything's kind of maxed out. There's a bunch of these little 15 to, 60 unit deals that are just all over the place.
Yeah, and my camera just cut out, but if you can still hear me, we'll keep going.
I can, yeah.
What are the typical like cosmetic renovations or operational improvements that you focus on to create that value without going into like super heavy redevelopment?
Yeah, so we'll kind of experiment when we buy buildings. So we'll come in with a whole business plan around, hey, this is a 24 unit building. We know 13 of them have been renovated in the last 10 years. So, whatever, there's 9 left or 10 left or 11 left, whatever the number is. And we will plan roughly 15,000 bucks a door for our rehabs. And we just know we've done hundreds of them now. They're going to be between 10 and 20 grand, so that's close. It just depends the lift that we want to do. But this is kind of like the art and the science of this business that I think is really fun is we will almost always have an original vintage, classic vintage unit. If it comes due, we're just going to clean it up. We're just going to paint it and clean it up and then rent it and see what we can get. If we're close to our pro forma numbers, then we know we just need tiny little tweaks to make it good. That turns into like a $3,000 turn. So that's super inexpensive. If then the next one comes up though, we're going to do a bigger lift. We'll rip out all the carpet. We'll bring LVP in. We'll bring cabinets in that look like these. We'll just do stainless appliances. We'll do stone countertops. Like we'll make them nice. That one might be more like 18, 19 grand, something like that. And then we'll see what we can get for it. And if we can get more than we expected, and it's like the delta is big enough to merit it, then we'll start doing that on all of them. But sometimes we find it just doesn't really change the rental ranges that much. So, it's not worth it. Like we'll only do stuff that changes the NOI in the building.
And I would imagine with it being in such a high rent growth market, you have a little bit more flexibility with that, where maybe you can do a little bit less, but the rents have caught up in the time that you bought the building to like now. You mentioned in a LinkedIn post about a 9-unit where you like 2.5 extra equity in 15 months by renovating 3 units and doing like no exterior upgrades. So that's a super light touch for a really, really big gain.
Crazy.
How do you decide when a property needs only light cosmetic fixes versus like a super heavy value add? Can you go a little bit further into that?
Yeah. So we always plan from a capital perspective to do all of it, so that's where we start with. So we'll say we're going to make sure all the panels are up, the roofs are replaced, exteriors are cleaned up, parking lots are resurfaced. Every single unit gets a $15,000 touch, and we'll budget for that. Like we'll plan for that. Once we take it over though, we do what I was talking about earlier in terms of that experimentation around seeing what we'll actually get if we market it properly, if we just clean it up, if we're literally just putting it out there and seeing what it's worth. That's when the river kind of flows and we'll figure out what actually makes sense for the deal. So if we can get, within 5 to 10% of our pro forma for rental targets, and not do huge value adds, we're not going to do them.
Right.
Like it just doesn't make sense because then we just get in the operational flow of the increases. And then at the end of the third year, we're where we want to be.
Right. And on another deal, you described acquiring a 27-unit property, filling in an unused swimming pool to install like a playground, and then renovating half the units, improving the exterior. Can you walk us through that decision? How did you determine what amenities to change?
Yeah. So swimming, I don't like swimming pools, first of all. Like, if I think, 20 years from now, if I've got a tremendous amount of cash that I just want to park and make 6% a year net or something, like maybe we'll go buy a super bougie, 250 unit building and just park it and collect cash flow on it. Like maybe that'll have a swimming pool. Insurance is just, it's riskier. The thing that we found with swimming pools, especially in these smaller complexes that don't have like on-site employees all the time, they end up being amazing targets for kids throwing rocks. So kids just love to throw rocks in swimming pools. Like that just, it's a super random thing that I think you can't, this is the stuff that you can't learn, like reading books on how to buy apartment buildings. It's like that just happened because it happened to me. Like, and I learned it, right? Like, I'm like, what in the world? But it truly is like the dang thing was just full of rocks all the time. Like, and so we were spending so much money cleaning it, then worrying about locking it at certain times of the night and how best we manage that and how do we keep eyes on it without having eyes on it. It's like this whole thing. And so the byproduct of this was we actually did like a survey across the building and asked the people in this 27 unit, like, hey, who here actually cares about the pool? Like who's actually using it? Like one person came back and they were like, well, it's nice to know it's there, but like they never were actually using it. And so I just made the decision to fill it in and put a playground there. And everybody in the building was super pumped, like that's way more useful. Even if you don't have kids, your friends come over that have kids or whatever, they can play on the playground. Insurance is much happier. Like all of these things just made sense. So that's literally like if we buy something with a pool, which isn't super common in Western Washington, but in Eastern Washington, there's a lot of pools because it gets really hot over there in the summers. We will pretty much 100% of the time fill it in. So that's just in the business plan now.
Eastern Washington's like a desert, right?
Yes. Yeah. Desert climate, 300 days of sun a year.
Yeah.
But yeah, 100+ degree summers consistently. So definitely, yeah. But no, we're not. It's just not worth it.
So you guys, as you mentioned, you switched to a third-party property management from being in-house, essentially you doing the work yourself. With a portfolio that's now spanning across a few different states in Washington, how do you manage those assets effectively? Do you have like an asset management routine or key
Yeah.
metrics you watch closely?
Yeah, so now we're actually coming full because we're rolling out in-house property management now. So we went from, I mean, I wouldn't even call it in-house property management. I would just call it me doing my best to collect checks and coordinate maintenance people to third-party property management. And then now we're bringing it back in-house just because our portfolio is big enough and it's growing a lot faster. We just want and need the control. So that's what we've been uh, experimenting with the last 3 months with one building that personally own to just make sure that it works before we scale it out to the rest of the place. But from an asset management perspective, yeah, I'm always learning. I think you can always get better at this, and there's ways to go really hard at it, and there's ways that are realistic, and there's ways that actually work and don't. I create what I call like a North Star document on each building before we close on it, and we have a meeting with whatever property management company that we're going to be utilizing. Now we have relationships with these people, so they know our flow, they know what I'm after. So like it's a lot easier now, just because it's been 7-8 years, whatever, working with them. But it's like, hey, I want to get all of the 2-bed 1 baths to this rent amount, all of the 1-bed 1 baths to this rent amount. I don't care if it takes 2 years, but I want no more than 5 vacancies at a time if we can control it. And it changes depending on the deal and the building and how we're capitalized and all of those things, right? But we are the ones picking rental rates. We are the ones picking remodel finishes. We are controlling everything. They're logistically conduits, for those things, but it's our business plan that they're executing on.
Right. And you've partnered with third-party general contractors for renovations. What's your strategy for working with GCs on value-add projects? Do you bid out every job? Do you stick with a few trusted contractors? Are you bringing construction management in-house?
Yeah. So for like 10 years, I bid out everything and, dealt with a bunch of different companies. And, quite frankly, we just didn't have the scale to be meaningful to these guys, So that's the thing that I've seen now is the bigger you get, the more that these contractors want to be your preferred partner, right? Just because we have more jobs. I mean, like I would say we always have at least 5 rehabs going at any one time. And, that's going to grow exponentially, particularly if the property management business goes where I think it's going to go, just because we're going to solve that need and be third party as well. But now we have preferred contacts basically by county. So, it depends where the buildings are, but we've got our go-tos. And then we just know, we say, hey, this is like 100% make it nice, and they know what that means to us. And of course we're still approving things, but it's like, and then, or another one, I'll say this is a lipstick one, like just paint, clean it up, make sure it's functional, everything works. Right. But like, we don't need to make this super nice and then kind of some middle of the road stuff or whatever. But yeah, it's nice because we have the trust built with them. So we can literally say, hey, 12 grand on this one, go, like, or 8 grand on this one, go, or 20 grand on this one, go. Like but it took a long time to get there.
Nice. And any
Yeah.
tips for managing those renovations to make sure they're on time and on budget when you're not doing them yourself or being your own GC?
Yeah. I mean, it's tricky, right? Like and again, I've gotten burned quite a few times, like learning. And I think that's probably the only way to truly learn in anything is to get hurt by it, is at least how I feel. But, we've learned we don't pay the contractors until they're done. So we don't have any front load risk in terms of, you hear the stories of people putting 50% down and contractors leaving, or they're not incentivized to finish it quickly because they already have your money and they'll just move on to other jobs. Like, I think it takes a certain level of trust before we can get here because they are oftentimes front loading and shouldering the expenses up front. So I know that that's not super common, but we've gotten to that place now where it's nice. We can just say, hey, go and we'll pay you when you're done. So like, get it done, and like we have our unit turned down now to less than 2 weeks. So the timeline's pretty quick. Sometimes it's 4 days. It just depends what their schedule is. But I think that is the power of having a partner that has some scale in a region is you got some horsepower behind you to actually get it done quick.
Right.
Yeah.
And you come from a tech kind of data background, right? And I'm curious how you take that approach into multifamily investing. Do you have a way that you like to leverage data or tech tools in your business, whether it's underwriting deals, forecasting performance, market analysis, asset management? What does that stack look like?
This is also forever evolving, and I think it always will. We have two underwriting models. We've got a simple one that we use first that I can get a whole deal in less than 5 minutes. We have a second underwriting model that we do for like 25 plus unit buildings once they're under contract and we're raising on it, just because we have some more sophisticated investor partners, that want to see the weeds. And that one is kind of a bear, like it's by unit by month for 7 years, in terms of like collections and vacancy plans and rehab plans and all of these things. But it's great once you have it done because you can go back and compare what you forecasted to what's actually happening. We are figuring out how best to leverage AI. I think it's super fascinating. Even just in Chat GPT, it's like you could throw in offering memorandums and spreadsheets and all these things and say, hey, like, tell me, find anomalies for me. Like we were looking at a deal. Well, we just locked our next deal under contract today, but we were looking at a few deals last week, like making sure we're making the right call. And I threw just an offering memorandum. It wasn't listed yet, but these brokers had put together this offering memorandum in Chat GPT. And I just was like, find something wrong in this. Like just random prompts like that. And it came back and it said, hey, the water utility is like 40% higher than what it should be market average in this region. And I was like, wait, what? And I probably wouldn't have pulled that out right away, right? And so then I went and looked at it and I was like, the water usage is really high. And then I reached out to the broker and the owner and they're like, yeah, actually, we had a leak mitigation company in there to try to figure out what's going on. We can't figure out where this water leak's coming from. And I was like, maybe tenants are having, laundry parties because they weren't metering utilities. And they were like, oh, shoot, like maybe that's, but anyway, it just started this like dialogue around that. And it was really useful. And it literally took 2 minutes to get that pulled out from it. So things like that are really interesting. But no, I think real estate's super archaic still in terms of technology. And I think that there is a place for technology and everything. But I still think that this game is about fundamentals and just knowing what you don't know and like not getting into something where you'd be over your skis.
Right. Yeah, something my buddy turned me on to recently is making sure if you have all your documents in Google Drive, so if you have folders full of leases or utility bills or whatever, you can ask Gemini about those certain things. So I've created like a lease audit prompt, like a lease abstract prompt or whatever, that gives me an abstract of all the leases that are in Google Drive and tells me like, what's the rental rate? When does it end? What utilities are they responsible for? That kind of thing.
It's amazing.
So,
yeah, it's amazing. I think it's there is so many cool, even just simple things, right? Like writing emails, like formatting things. I was monkeying around with like an Excel GPT tool, where I was like, hey, add this formula here and add this line item here and this column here. And it was working, like it's pretty cool. So I think there's room to like play around and figure out where there's some cool things that you can actually leverage. I still think the key to anybody getting in this game is just making sure you're really, really clear on your debt strategy and not getting too aggressive. Like it's just that's where we see everybody in my world fall, is assuming that interest rates are going to stay sub 4 forever. Like deals only work if they're there and they, and now they're hurting. And it's hard to see. I don't know. I haven't seen technology that helps with those things yet, but in terms of like asking it for help or perspective, for sure, it's awesome.
Yeah. So you have a pretty tight focus on Washington. We've already spoken about it. How have you approached building relationships with brokers and doing off-market direct-to-seller outreach?
Yeah, so we've only to this point bought unlisted off-market kind of direct deals. So I've never bought anything listed. Like that being said, we're currently locked up on our first deal that was listed, and there was negotiation on it and it was pretty cool. So like it's never say never, but for me at least, I think it was just time in the game. And my reputation is strong here in terms of if we get a deal under contract, we're going to buy it. Like we're not going to back out. We don't monkey around. We don't lock deals up to then try to go fight price aggressively unless there's a reason, right? Like then we will. But we are known as like, hey, if Veritas comes in and says they're going to buy your deal, like it's going to be a clean process. There's going to be no BS in there. And we're just really true to that. And so I think our reputation with brokers, with owners, with families that own these things directly is just really clean in that perspective that, we're just not going to waste anybody's time. So there is, I think, a lot to be said about hustle, and you can go out there and I did this for a long time, like I wasn't a terribly attractive client for a commercial real estate broker for years because we would buy like one deal every couple of years or whatever, right? Like that wasn't that steady. Now it's like we're a great client for, the brokers that we work with because we're buying like two deals a quarter or something. So it's like now it makes a lot of sense. But I think it's just time in the game, doing what you say you're going to do, like not lying to anybody, just basic human things.
Right.
Yeah.
And in regards to raising capital, you have said that you raise capital only for your own deals. You're not a general fundraiser. What led
No.
you to that decision, and how do you convey this to investors?
Well, honestly, what led me to creating Veritas in the beginning was a lot of encouragement from mentors to go bigger with the model that I had created. And then when I was in sort of like an interview season where I was just asking anybody and everybody that I knew, like, hey, have you ever invested in a fund? Have you ever invested in the syndication? Like, what's your experience been? What didn't you like? What went well? What didn't go well? Like, just asking a million questions. So just like a deeply curious person. I think that's important for everything, but particularly for anything new, right? And the feedback and what I saw was so alarming to me. Like, I was just always under this impression that somebody that would syndicate a deal, that could get investors to give them their money would be very good. Like, that was what I just assumed. I thought I needed much more of a track record to go out there and raise money. And, now looking back on it, there are people that syndicate their first ever thing that they do in apartment investing. Like, and I had been just doing it with my own money a little bit. Like, some friends had thrown some money in deals over the years, but it certainly wasn't, they were wanting to do that. Like, it wasn't me going and asking them for it. It was the opposite. And, so once I got my like eyes just like glued open into like, holy cow, like there are some great operators out there for sure, but there's a lot of tire kickers out there, and there's a lot of people that quite frankly aren't ethical, doing these kind of things. And it made me super motivated. Like, oh man, I want people to be able to invest in these things because I think they're wonderful places to have your money. And I don't know of a better place that's more tax advantage or, gives you drip money along the way and has this equity multiple on the back, and you can basically pass it down to your kids for free if you set it up right. Like, there's all of these beautiful things about it. And so I was like, I want to create a group for somebody that believes in my regions that we're buying and operating in to be able to put their money in and feel good about it. And so, now that was really what got me kind of feisty in the very beginning of 2 years ago about like, holy cow, if somebody's going to do this, we should do it. Nobody's perfect, but we've got more of a track record than most of the groups out here doing it.
Right. And through that track record, you've attracted over 60 investors who trust you with their capital. What do you think has been most crucial in building that trust?
I think it's just honestly talking about the lessons that I've learned the hard way. Like, that is really how we pitch. It's not like, hey, this deal is the golden goose and it's the best thing in the world. Like, we buy very steady, reliable 15+% of your deals. Like, that's what we do. So if I can see a 15+% IRR to investors over 5 years, we'll buy it. And it's with our conservative underwriting. It's with us running it. It's full control. I think the balance though is if I were to spend 60 minutes with a potential investor, like 45 to 50 of those minutes are talking about like what I've done, what I've learned not to do, how I've gotten hurt on stuff in the past. Because I think those are the capital preservation strategies. It's not so much in the deal, it's what you don't do, and what to ask, and your process, and the people that, like, how good are your inspectors? Like, how good are your property managers? How good is your underwriting? How accurate is it? Like, are you full of crap? Like, in terms of like, is rent actually going to be able to be 80th percentile for the region? Like, probably not. If the thing's got the build before 2010, probably not. Like, but there's people out there doing class A rent projections on class B minus things, and that's the kind of stuff that we can talk to like really, really clearly. And that's why I think too, raising money has gone a little smoother than I would have expected. Just because people that are interested in doing this kind of thing, I'm not the person they've sat down with. And I think they can just see the experience, the conviction, and the transparency.
So tell us about the team behind Veritas. How do you divide roles with your co-founder, Lauren, and with other people?
Yeah. So Lauren and I met through, her dad was actually like a mentor of mine. So, and she was looking to invest in a deal on her own, like directly. And so I had got to know her dad. He buys businesses in the region, so he's an entrepreneur, but not in real estate. And he was like, "Hey, maybe instead of doing this first, you should meet this guy that I know, Alex. Like he's been doing it. He could just maybe like show you some tricks or whatever, right?" Like that's how it started. But her and I's personalities and then our backgrounds actually made a ton of sense. And to me, I've had quite a few I mean, all guys, but people that came up in the game with me young, doing their own thing, asked to partner. But I've always been sort of like a 75-year-old, from a risk perspective, like inside of like a 25-year-old, like kind of hustle and go get it. So it's both. And so I was never aligned with their risk strategies. And I'm so grateful now because almost all of those guys that I kind of came up doing this with are kind of underwater, like and it's just high debt, variable loans, like all of these things are coming back to bite them a little bit. And so Lauren came from tech, AWS for 8.5 years, really bright, really great with people. The apartment game is not that complicated, like, so to me, I was like, you can learn that. So we partnered basically on like the DNA of who we were with those things. And then she's already up to speed and, killing it. And it's been a year and a half. The rest of our team is kind of like, I think of it as sort of like snipers. So, we've obviously got a bunch of brokers that we work with, but we've got one shop in town that we do almost all of our activity with. We've got one debt guy that we do almost all of our debt with just because he's great. And we've done enough cycles with him and he has our file and it's all kind of turnkey. We've got an investor relations guy on our team, Joshua. He's amazing. He's like a professional networker. Everybody knows him, respects him, loves him. He again, super transparent, honest, ethical guy. So, if he's walking in front of a group and says like, "Hey, I'm representing Veritas and these are my partners," like they're going to trust him, which we love. And then we've got a ton of sort of contractors, I guess, whether it's, handyman, repair guys, more loan guys, insurance agents, there's just like a huge network of people that make the thing hum, but they're not direct employees of Veritas, which is also kind of nice. Yeah.
Nice. And you had mentioned earlier, right? There's some of those guys that are underwater and real estate isn't always smooth sailing. So what setbacks, deal setbacks, downturns, I guess, what are some lessons that you could share from the past few years, the past 10 years, where you handled something went wrong and you learned something about risk management or resilience in the process?
Yeah. Thankfully, we have never done a single capital call on either my personal deals or syndicated deals. We're not even close. And so I would say, first and foremost, like you need more money than you think in terms of like your raise. And again, we'll look at these prospectus of these syndications of other syndicators that we know in town, and they are raising the down payment amount and the closing cost amount. Like that's what they're raising. And I'm like, what about reserves? What about CapEx? What about your fees? Like you're like, it's 30-40% light. But the problem is the deal doesn't pencil with the correct raise amount. And so like it seems so basic, but you have to find deals that work when you're raising all of those things up front, in my opinion. Like otherwise like you're just not going to sleep well.
So their business plan is to cash flow renovations, it sounds like.
Yes. And that also has to do with hitting projected rents, which are usually pretty optimistic. Yeah, I couldn't ever do that. Like, it's like, we want to come in and I want to know like, hey, what if there's an opportunity for a 40 unit building that we buy? What if there's an opportunity to turn 25 tenants in the first year? Like that could be great, because it's just like, we're going to get to our NOI a lot faster in terms of our projection, but we need to be able to shoulder the carry costs during that time. Cause we're going to hemorrhage money in the first year. So I look at it like, hey, what if we collected $0 and we spent $300,000, or whatever the number is, right? And we're going through and we have it specific for each deal in the first 18 months. Like, could we still carry it based on where we're at after close? And like, if the answer is yes, let's go. It's going to be great. We're going to probably have too much money. We probably overraised it. We could have probably juiced a better IRR on it. But like, I think a capital call is a death sentence. And I also don't want to be wildly stressed as we're executing on the business plan. Like there's enough stuff, to be worried about with this.
So if our listeners invested or interested in value add multifamily, what are the top pieces of advice that you would give them?
So if you want to go do it yourself, and like not be passive, then I would say find an operator in your market that has, at least 30 million bucks worth of stuff and draft off of them as aggressively as you can, and just learn everything you possibly can about what they're doing, how they're doing it. Like, I don't mind that at all. If somebody reaches out to me and says, hey, I think I want to do this, like I'll tell them everything we're doing. Like there's nothing terribly secret about this. It's just execution and the ability to go do it. So I don't mind if somebody's looking for places to park their money passively and be an LP in a syndication or a fund or whatever. Interview the living heck out of the sponsor, and I would look for people that did it and do it with their own money first. I would look for people that can tell you about the ways that they've learned hard lessons and ask those questions and see if they've been through at least a couple downturns or hiccups or how they handle COVID, like, stuff like that. But yeah, I just think it's about getting to know the person and seeing if they're honest or if they're just swinging at something they've never done.
Yeah. And I'd love to ask some questions about some deals that you've done so far, like specific questions about specific deals. So the Centennial deal, 62 units, you guys had an offer for $7.75 million in 2023. That was nearly triple your original purchase price, but you chose to hold it and you now project an $8.5 million exit. So why not exit in 2023? And what's your framework for choosing to refi and hold versus sell when there's a strong offer?
So I think that was a combination of, at the time, there weren't that many deals to go up, like to go 1031 into. So, I think you could take your money. We had 1031 that specific money like 5 times. So the basis on that deal is super low. So I didn't like any of the deals that were out there. So that was kind of my first hang up. We are super, super under leveraged on that. I think we owe 2.8 million bucks or something. And we've refied it twice, like since we bought it. So that one's been amazing. But I think for me, that group that I have that one with is just more like, hey, we're probably going to turn this thing onto more of like a cash flow machine at this point. We'll see what rates do. We've got 3 more years or something on the loan, so there's no rush. And if it makes sense to do a big cash out refi and keep it, cool. That was kind of a big, like when we bought that thing, it's 62 units. They're all little studios. Walla Walla, Washington is like a winery, tourist, kind of agriculture town. And I believe the rents when we bought it in place were like under $400 a month per unit. Yeah. And so I remember when that was one of the deals that we bought when we did the 1031 from West to Eastern Washington. And a buddy of mine was like, hey, you should go look at Walla. And I was like, I'm born and raised in Western Washington, never been to Walla Walla. I'm like, what is, it's like a 5-hour drive from Seattle. It's pretty far. And anyway, I remember driving out there and there were some hotels breaking ground. And I was like, okay, they probably know more about like demographic population growth, like those types of things than I'll ever know. Like, I mean, a Hilton's going in. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And the basis was just so low in the thing. I mean, it was a 62 unit collecting 25 grand a month or something like that. Like it was just so low. I was like, I think we could definitely crank it. In my head, it was like to 650 a month. Like that's what I thought made sense. Like here, looking at it now, it's like 1095 a door per unit. And that's still a good deal, like that's a good deal for the market. It's not, that's why it's always full. But, now you're looking at it and that thing's ripping off 60,000+ a month in rent, and I'm like, holy smokes, like that was a killer deal. But yeah, that was just more of like a product of like, all right, like it's cash flowing like crazy. We don't have to do anything with it. When the time comes, we'll see, but it's going to be hard to go buy that cash flow too.
Right.
Yeah.
So Quinty Village, 28 units. That deal showed that you returned all investor equity through refi by year 3. So what specific renovations or management efficiencies did you implement to boost the NOI that quickly? And were there any underwritten surprises or post-acquisition discoveries that helped unlock that value?
Yeah, this was the swimming pool deal, but this one was basically purely just an operational play. So this is an Eastern Washington tertiary market, Yakima, which doesn't have that. I mean, there's not that great a sophistication out there. So we bought this thing. It was a family that owned it, family that managed it. Like they didn't really know what they were doing. It was kind of one of those napkin math, like when we asked for P&L and T12s and all these things, it's like, yeah, like you could tell they had no idea what those things even were, which are good and bad, right? Like I kind of get excited when I see those things because I'm like, all right, there's probably some room for us to run this thing better. But in terms of getting loans on them, it's like, oh no, like rents are low, expenses are high. Like none of this makes sense. So proceeds on the initial buy is probably going to be pretty rough. But that one we just literally did like cleanups and turns. Like that was just a pure operational lift. So that's an example of one where we thought there might need to be some more rehabs and things. That one needed some roofs and some basic things like that. But in terms of like CapEx in the units, Hardly any. It was just a pure operational play.
Nice. And your
Yeah.
average IRR across 8 deals is 39%. Many of those deals are 20% plus, despite varying in size, city, timing. What underwriting assumptions or operational principles help you maintain that level of consistency across different properties and market cycles?
Yeah. So first off, we always tell investors, we say, hey, we're marching towards a 15+% for you. Like our historical average is much better, but like that's where our head's at. And so that's where your head needs to be, so that's the definition of success, like not meeting what we've done in the past. There's been some good markets, good timing, things have happened organically that help, right? But the fundamentals that we look to are if we can get a 15+% over 5 years, and that's a combination of, 6 to 9% a year in cash flow, and again, about double that in equity gain, we're happy. That being said, a 15% over 5, if we can do the same business plan and exit it in 3, is like a 25. And so it's just kind of a time value thing. So I am of the mindset that, and I have been for the last year and a half, we want to buy everything that we possibly can right now that fits our buy boxes. Like I just feel like there's deals out there, debt's pretty stabilized. Like there's still a lot of fear and uncertainty. There's a lot of whys that I love right now. I want to buy as much as I possibly can, as long as the market stays kind of where it's at right now. But I think we'll turn these things around in 3 years.
Nice.
Yeah.
So your deck mentions a typical CapEx budget of 8 to 15,000 a unit. Can you break down for us what's typically included in that spend and just kind of go, I guess, line item by line item, if you will?
Yeah. So I think first off, we try to remove carpet always. So we're pulling carpet and we're bringing in LVP flooring, and that's standard. So we're down to like 95 cents a foot or something on LVP. We just get it at scale rate. It's pretty cheap. Most of our units are in the 6 to 800 square feet range, so it's not bad. That's going to be, let's call it $5,000. Like it just kind of depends again what the unit looks like. Is it 2 stories? Is it whatever, right? But we'll pretty much do that always, no matter what. LVP is going to last us like 15, 20. We don't need it 15 or 20 years, but it's going to last us the whole time that we hold the thing, right? So we're not going to have to monkey with carpet cleaning, replacing the carpet after every tenant moves out, like none of that stuff. Most of our buildings will allow pets. So again, if you get a pet in there, the carpet's toast. So like LVP is not a problem. Where we have variance, so is the kitchens. So it just kind of depends on the asset and what we want to do to the interiors of the unit. So a perfect example of this is we bought a deal on Linwood, which is about 20 minutes north of downtown Seattle Drive, last summer. So average 2-bed, 1-bath rent in that thing was about $1,650 in terms of what the current operator was getting. When we looked at the market data, median rent for the market was $1,950. Super high end stuff's like high 2,000s, approaching 3,000 a month. So I was like, all right, if we can get to 1,900, 1,950 across the board here, like this deal's going to do great. First, we took the building over. First unit came due for a tenant moved out, so we could turn it. We just did LVP flooring. We kept the white appliances. We kept the light wood cabinets, and we just painted it. So, that was like a $7,000 lift or something like that. It wasn't much. We got 1,950 for that. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. Like we're already at our pro forma. This already makes sense. We're good. The next one that came due, I was like, let's push it and see what happens if we go nicer. So LVP, stainless appliances, new cabinets, and granite countertops, which is as nice as we're going to do, like across the board. 2,150, like right out of the gate. And that was like 17 or 18,000 bucks, to do that full turn. So that's kind of compelling. And, in terms of like the delta for another $9,000, like another $200-300 a month in rent, it's pretty great. So that's going to be the plan at that building for all 17 of those units, is to get them all to that level. But again, it's just that, like it's nothing too crazy. It's the flooring's going to be the same across the board. Kitchens get variable depending on what condition they're in. And then the bedrooms and stuff are just like new baseboards, paint, and that's it.
Nice.
Yes.
So what's next for you and for Veritas? Do you plan to continue expanding within Washington State? So you keep your assets there. How do you see your strategy evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
We are fully heads down on just scale of the existing strategy. So I don't want anything to change in terms of the types of deals we're buying. The buy boxes are going to stay the same, $4 to $10 million purchase prices, 15 to 60 unit buildings. Snohomish County, in this particular pocket, Eastern Washington pockets where we already have scale, we're going to be building out our own property management stack. So that'll be a value add to the portfolio as well. But there are over 1,000 of these buildings in Snohomish County alone. So it's the opportunity is, I mean, you drive down the street, you see one every third tax parcel feels like it's something that we would want to buy probably. So there's no shortage of them. There's also a lot of this, baby boomers and stuff that have been just self-managing and sitting on these things for 20 years and they're trying to get out. Their kids don't want them. Their kids would just rather have the money. And so we're buying from them. So I don't see it changing at all. We're just trying to go as big as we possibly can and stay contained along the way.
So you guys, you yourself personally, I want to ask about some personal drivers. What's continuing to drive you? Because you've already gone past your tech salary. I'm sure you're making some great income with real estate. At this stage, is it about legacy? Is it about transforming communities? Why do you keep doing what you're doing?
Yeah, very interesting mental model, right? Like, because a couple of years ago, I kind of hit a point earlier than I thought I would, and I played a lot of golf for like a year, and I lasted like 6 months before I was kind of itchy, and I was like, all right, this isn't it for me. Like, I was like, I don't know, 32 or 33 or something, and it wasn't doing it. So my drivers are really like making sure that when I'm 80 years old, I don't have any regrets in terms of like not reaching whatever potential I have. So, I just want to utilize my talents and my treasures as best as I can to like do the thing that I'm built to do. And so far, this is my favorite thing to do, is to think through how do we build this business? How do we empower our partners? How do we create great lives for people that work with us and for us? Our tenants are all super happy when we take over these buildings. So there's a huge positive component of that too, is like being a really good landlord, like giving people really great places to live. That is really nice when we get feedback like that. It's awesome to hear. So I think the people element of this business is really my why. And then also making sure when I'm old and super gray that I don't have regrets in terms of not doing what I should have done.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So great conversation. Thanks for joining me, Alex. For those who want to reach out to you, who want to have a conversation with you, or are interested in investing or want to get started themselves, where should they find you? Where can they reach out?
Yeah, VeritasEquityPartners.com. Our website is the easiest place. There's a contact page. I think my cell phone number is still on there, so people can just call or text me also directly. I love talking about this stuff, and I love helping people too. It doesn't have to be like a potential investor call. I just think it's a super fun topic to talk about. I'm happy to share whatever I know.
Nice. Alex is also on LinkedIn. Alex Burch regularly shares lessons from the field. So Alex, thank you again for joining us on Capital Conversations. Looking forward to seeing where you and Veritas go next. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a like, leave a comment. Until next time, keep learning and keep investing wisely. This has been AJ. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.